In this tutorial, I'm going to help you find the height of a cylinder. And in order to do that, you need to be given the radius and the volume. Now, sometimes you're given a radius, sometimes you're given a diameter, and we're going to talk about both of those examples. So in this video, you need to be using the correct formula for a cylinder. You need to know where to substitute in your values, and you need to be able to solve for the correct variable. So I had these questions worked out in another video, but for some students it was too many concepts in one movie, so I decided to just create this movie focusing just on finding the height. Okay, so let's take a look at our first example. We're going to do some working backwards here, meaning before we had some random values here, and all we had to do was just compute. We had to just multiply pi times r squared times h. But for us today, we're going to have to actually work backwards towards the answer of volume. So if the volume of this cylindrical container is 942.47 cubic feet, and the radius is 10 feet across, can you find this missing height value? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to use our volume formula, which is pi times radius squared times height. And we're going to remove anything that we know. So I'm going to take some notes over here. These are the three letters that we need to replace. Because pi is constant, it's always the same value. So, do we know the volume? Yep, it's 942.47. Do we know the radius? Yes, we do. It's 10. And do we know the height? No. So now that I took some notes, I know which letters to erase and which ones to replace. So I have a volume. Pi is permanent. I have a radius, the square is permanent, but I don't have a height, so the h remains. So I'm going to fill in these values here. My radius is 10, and my answer or my volume is 942.47. Now here's where it starts to get a little tricky for kids, so let me just do one step at a time here. There's nothing for me to do on the left side of this equation because there are no operations. But over here, there's timesing by pi, there's squaring 10, and there's timesing by h. So there's three things going on there. Why don't we just start with this one because it's the easiest. So pick up your calculator if you're not sure what it is. But I'm just going to recopy the rest of this equation. But instead of writing a 10 squared, I'm going to write its value, which is 100. But everything else has to stay the same. All right, so I want to get this letter h by itself. So that means that I need to make all of this go away. And technically what all of this is timesing by 100 and timesing by pi. Now both of these factors here, pi and 100, both of them are multiplying h. And if I want to get h alone, I have to do the inverse of those operations. And the opposite of multiplying is dividing. Now the good news is, if they're both being divided, you can do it at the same time, right? So I have 100 times pi, and what I'm going to do, this says 100 times pi, or pi times 100. What I'm going to do is divide by that whole thing. Now I'm going to switch it around a little bit only because I like my numbers first and my pi sign last, but that's the same thing. Pi times 100, 100 times pi. I'm going to divide this whole side by that quantity. And remember, whatever you do to the right, got to do to the left. So I'm also going to divide this side by 100 times pi. Now, these reduce to 1, these reduce to 1, and voila, I finally have an h all isolated by itself. Now this over here, ooh, that's a hot mess. But the good news is you don't have to do the math. Your calculator will do the math for you. So I know a lot of you don't have a calculator at home. You should. It's so much more handy when you have this in front of you and you can just type all these things in real fast. But I know that some of you are using an online calculator, like say maybe this Google calculator here. A lot of students use this calculator here, and we can use that. All right, so I'm going to show you on this Google calculator, but then I'm going to do the rest of the math on my home calculator. Okay, so on this calculator here, I'm going to type all of this at one time. So I'm going to type 942.47, 942.47 942.47. All of that. That's my whole numerator. And I'm going to divide it by an actual quantity. See these parentheses here? That means it's more than one thing, right? So I have a quantity here, so I want to make sure that I'm typing that in my calculator. 100 times pi. So my answer is 2.999999, and it says round to the nearest whole number, so I'm going with my height is 3 feet. Now I'm going to go back to that calculator for a second. I'm going to type it again, 942.47 divided by 100 times pi. And this time, I'm not going to use my parentheses. But see, this one, it came out right, but oftentimes it doesn't. So be very careful to check that, okay, when you're using your calculator. So I'm going to show you on mine, just to show you. 942.47 divided by, I'm not going to use parentheses this time, 100 times pi. And look at that, I got a totally weird answer. Now if I had typed some parentheses around this, right, watch this. So I'm going to put in here some parentheses. So I'm going to insert an open parens here. I'm going to go all the way to the end, put my closed parens in. And now look at my answer. 3. Those two are totally different answers. So depending on what calculator you're using, I want you to be very careful and always use the parentheses so that you can't be wrong. All right, let's take another look at an example just like this one. So pause the video if you think you're ready. If you got your paper out and you think you're ready, give it a try. And then turn the video back on and let's take a look at the solution. So take some notes. Excuse me. So I took my notes over here and now I'm going to fill in my values. The volume is 75.4 pi times radius squared times height, right? So my radius is 2 and my height I don't know. So I'm going to copy everything over again, but I'm going to get rid of that square symbol. Pi times 4 times height. Now remember, we're going to divide by both of these items at the same time. So I prefer to reverse the order, but you're not wrong if you write it the other way. Pick up my calculator, clear it out, and type 75.4 divided by parentheses 4 times second key pi. Okay. 6.000000. I'm going with 6 inches for my height. All right, that's not so bad. See? Okay. Now this one is a little different. It looks scary, but it's actually so much easier. If the radius of a cylinder is 8 inches and the volume of the cylinder is 192 pi cubic inches, find the height to the nearest whole number. Right? So my volume is 192 pi, my radius is 8, and my height is, I don't know. So we start filling that in here. So 192 pi equals pi times radius squared times height. Keep everything the same except for your square value. Compute that first. All right, how does this look, right? So the good news is when we go to divide to isolate our h, and we divide by 64 times pi, well, that was a little, that handwriting was terrible. Let me try that again. 64 pi, and I do that over here as well, right? Remember why we did that over here? Because pi and pi cancel out, and 64 and 64 cancel out, and that's what isolated my h. Well, look at the left-hand side. If you have a pi in the numerator and a pi in the denominator, they cancel out. You don't even have to type it in your calculator. So I'm just going to pick up my calculator and do some easy typing. 192 divided by 64. That's it. 3. So my height is 3 inches. See, you didn't like the way it looked at the beginning, but when you see it worked out, having that pi there is so much easier. My answer was simple. All right, last one's a little tricky. The volume of a cylinder is 1,470.3 cubic millimeters. If the diameter of the cylinder is 12, find the height. So remember, when we took our notes over here, like this, we actually don't know either one of these. And you can't have two unknowns. So if I don't know the radius and I don't know the height, but I do know the diameter, I can convert this to make it a radius. Right? So I'm going to take half of that number, and that gives me a radius of 6. So 1470.3 equals pi times 6 squared times h, or 1470.3 equals pi times 36 times h. Now, you know, sometimes as you get really good at this, you start thinking ahead. This is what I mean. So as you substitute your values, then on your next step, you start writing it in that order. You start kind of commuting them right away, and that's a really good move. 36 pi, 36 pi. Get your calculator ready. 1470.3 divided by parentheses 36 pi. 13. All right, that's it. Those are the only kinds of questions I can ask you if you are charged with finding the height. So I want you to pause the video now, get your paper ready. I want you to try these 4 questions, then turn the video back on when you're ready to check your solutions. All right, here we go. Let's take a look. Number 1. Pause the video if you need to double check your work. Number 2. Number 3. And finally, number 4. All right, that's it. Hope you have a better understanding of how you isolate for the letter H for height.